Welcome to today's explainer. Okay, think back to the history you were taught in school. We all memorized the exact same dates, we traced those same little global sailing routes in our textbooks, and learned the names of all those legendary explorers who charted the unknown. But what if the traditional narrative we just accept as absolute fact is actually missing a monumental piece of the puzzle? Today, we're examining the Norse discovery of America. We are going to completely separate deeply ingrained historical myths from the actual, hard archaeological facts. We're going to rely entirely on the data, the sagas, and the soil itself to guide us through what is honestly one of history's greatest untold truths. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, Before Christopher Columbus, the 500-year head start.
Did you know Christopher Columbus wasn't the first European to find America? Seriously, it's a question that just completely disrupts our preconceived notions of world history. I mean, Columbus gets the massive parades, right? The federal holidays, entire cities named after him, all despite being incredibly late to the party. When we actually study history objectively, we have to be willing to look at the facts and ask ourselves, if the legendary voyage of 1492 wasn't the first, then who exactly beat him to it? And perhaps even more importantly, how long before Columbus did this actually happen? Well, our historical sources confirm that Europeans actually arrived a massive 500 years before Columbus. Just think about the sheer scale of that time gap for a second. 5 full centuries. To really understand what a 500-year head start means, we have to basically rewind the clock all the way back to roughly the year 1080. So while Christopher Columbus was sailing in the late 1400s, the era of the Renaissance, this earlier arrival happened smack in the middle of the Middle Ages. In the year 1000, the Byzantine Empire was at its absolute height, the Song dynasty was ruling China, and the Norman conquest of England hadn't even happened yet. That is how incredibly far back into antiquity this transatlantic arrival actually took place. Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is the fascinating contrast between historical legacy and historical reality. Christopher Columbus holds the title of the widely credited explorer, right? He's got the PR legacy, but the historical fact of the first arrival? That belongs to a Norse navigator named Leif Erikson, who touched down exactly 500 years earlier. And Erikson wasn't just some random sailor. He was the son of Eric the Red, the legendary explorer who founded the first Norse settlements in Greenland. So exploration was quite literally in his blood. While the famous, widely celebrated narrative belongs to the man from Genoa, the actual empirical achievement, that belongs to the Norsemen. So this incredible journey began when Leif Erikson set sail from the icy, rugged shores of Greenland, venturing straight into the complete and total unknown of the brutal North Atlantic Ocean. And what's truly astounding here is the technical reality of exactly how they did it. They didn't have magnetic compasses. They didn't have modern astrolabes, nothing like that. These Norse navigators crossed literally one of the deadliest oceans on Earth by reading the world around them. It's like a giant puzzle. They used sun compasses, these carved wooden discs, to track the sun's shadow. On cloudy days, they likely used sunstones, which are these polarizing calcite crystals that could pinpoint the sun's location straight through thick fog. They read the subtle changes in ocean swells, monitored the color of the water, and even tracked the migratory flight paths of coastal birds. It was an absolute masterclass in ancient seafaring. Which brings us to Section 2. The Newfoundland settlement, a fleeting footprint. After braving that brutal North Atlantic, Erikson's crew finally reached land, touching down in what we know today as Newfoundland, Canada. But to the Norse, this wasn't Newfoundland. According to the ancient sagas, they named this new territory Vinland. And they called it Vinland because, well, compared to the harsh, freezing rocks of Greenland, this new continent was incredibly fertile. It was a gold mine. They found rivers just teeming with salmon, massive forests absolutely perfect for harvesting precious timber to build their ships, and, most importantly, wild grapes growing in abundance, which they immediately recognized could be used to make wine. They had essentially found an absolute paradise of natural resources. So the crucial point here is that for a really long time, the story of Vinland was considered just that, a story. Just a myth written in Old Norse poetry. That was until the 1960s, when a husband and wife archaeological team, Helge and Anstein Ingstad, actually followed the geographical clues in those ancient sagas and discovered Lenzo Meadows. This was a small, real-life settlement built in Newfoundland by Leif Erikson's expedition. I mean, the discovery was earth-shattering. Archaeologists didn't just find mounds of dirt. They found the smoking guns of European habitation. They unearthed iron slag, proving someone had been forging iron right there, a technology the indigenous populations of North America did not possess at the time. But the ultimate proof? A single tiny bronze cloak pin, universally recognized as a Norse artifact. That one little bronze pin physically cemented European footprints on North American soil centuries ahead of schedule. Now for the mystery. Section 3. Abandoned and untouched. The Disappearing Act. Here is the really wild part. Despite discovering this incredibly fertile land rich with timber and resources, the Vikings completely abandoned their outposts after only 20 years. Think about that. 20 years is scarcely a single generation. Why in the world would they undertake such a treacherous ocean crossing, build a fully functioning iron forging settlement, and then just pack up and leave so quickly? Well, the historical data points to two massive challenges. First, their supply lines were hopelessly stretched. They were a tiny group of settlers thousands of miles from their main base in Greenland. Second, the sagas tell us of fierce, increasingly violent clashes with the indigenous populations, whom the Norse referred to as Skraelings. Ultimately, outnumbered and incredibly far from home, the Norse just decided the cost of staying was simply too high.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how this all played out. The sequence of these events happens with incredible speed, followed by a truly staggering silence. Day 1, Erikson set sail from Greenland, and within roughly a year, they reach Newfoundland, explore the coast, and build a functioning settlement. They forge iron, they harvest timber, they clash with the locals, and then, abruptly by year 20, they abandon their outposts entirely. They sail back east, and the narrative just abruptly stops. What follows is a massive, echoing 5 centuries, where the continent remains completely untouched by Europeans.
For the next 500 years, the Americas existed in total isolation from Europe, and the scale of this separation is just profound. While North America sat undisturbed by transatlantic voyagers, the entire landscape of European history was violently shifting. During those 5 centuries of silence, the Crusades were fought and lost. The Black Death swept through Europe, literally wiping out a third of the population. The 100 Years' War raged, and the early sparks of the Renaissance began to illuminate Italy. Through all of those monumental, world-changing global shifts, the door to the Americas, which had been briefly forced open by a crew of daring Norsemen, remained firmly shut and entirely forgotten. So, what does this all mean? How different would history be if the Vikings hadn't left the continent untouched for another 5 centuries? Imagine, just for a moment, if that 20-year settlement had become permanent. Imagine if Columbus had arrived on the shores of the Americas in 1492, not to untouched wilderness, but to a bustling 500-year-old Norse metropolis, complete with massive iron forging operations and fleets of Viking longships dotting the eastern seaboard. The entire trajectory of human history, colonization, and global power dynamics would be completely unrecognizable today. It's a brilliant reminder that history is rarely as simple as the rhymes we learn in grade school. Keep questioning the narratives, and as always, keep asking questions. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you next time.